Your brain turns on at 3 a.m. and you weren't supposed to wake up. You don't move right away, but something feels off. Your body's heavy, almost pinned to the mattress, but your mind is already active, already pulling you upward. Thoughts begin forming before you even realize you're awake. Not loud, not chaotic, just fast enough to keep you alert. And in that moment, something inside you knows this isn't normal. You try to stay still, hoping sleep will come back on its own. You close your eyes tighter, waiting for the drift to return. But instead, your awareness sharpens. Your breathing feels more noticeable. Your mind starts connecting small, random thoughts. Nothing stressful, nothing urgent, just movement. And the more you try to relax, the more awake you feel becoming. There was no stress before bed, no clear trigger to explain this. So why does your brain switch on right in the middle of the night? Why does it feel like something activates behind the scenes? And why, once you wake up like this, you can't fall asleep again, even when your body is clearly exhausted, ready to rest? If this keeps happening night after night around the same time, then something deeper is controlling this pattern, and it's already happening before you wake up. I'm Dr. Sarah, a sleep medicine specialist with a background in psychiatry, and I've seen this exact pattern repeat itself thousands of times, especially in people over 40 who never struggled before. They come in confused, not desperate, just trying to understand, because nothing about their routine seems obviously wrong. They fall asleep without much difficulty most nights. But what happens after that is what they can't explain. They wake up in the middle of the night, often around 3 a.m., not suddenly, not in panic, just awake. And within seconds, their brain feels active again. Not anxious, not overwhelmed, just switched on. Their thoughts begin to move, quiet but persistent. Their body stays tired, but their mind won't follow. And that separation is what makes it so frustrating. Because it doesn't feel like typical insomnia. It doesn't feel like stress or overthinking. It feels like something inside the brain changed states, like a system that was supposed to stay off turned back on. And once that happens, going back to sleep feels impossible, even when their eyes are closed and their body's ready, even when they know they need to rest. If this keeps happening night after night around the same time, then something deeper is controlling this pattern, and it's already happening before you wake up. There's a specific biological shift happening at night, a mechanism that activates before they even wake up. And once you see what triggers it, the entire pattern starts to make sense. Most people assume this is just insomnia that takes time to fix, that it's something you have to manage slowly over months or years. They're told to be patient, to build better habits, to wait it out. And while those things can help in some cases, they don't explain why your brain keeps waking you up at the same time. They don't explain why it feels so precise, so consistent. And they definitely don't explain why your mind turns on so suddenly. But sleep science points in a different direction. In many cases, this pattern doesn't require long-term correction. It begins to shift the moment the brain stops triggering the interruption, not because sleep is being forced, but because something that was activating at night stops. And when that activation changes, the experience changes with it, sometimes faster than people expect. What's important to understand is this: your brain is not waking you up by accident. It's not happening randomly, and it's not because you lost sleep. There's a specific reason your awareness returns at that moment, a reason your mind becomes active while your body stays tired, a reason you can't fall asleep again once it starts. And until that reason is clear, everything else feels like guesswork. Because from the outside, it looks like insomnia, but from the inside, it feels different. It feels like something is interrupting the process, like your sleep is being cut off, not fading naturally. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because what interrupts sleep requires a different kind of solution, not more effort, but more understanding of what's happening underneath. And once people begin to see this clearly, something shifts, not in their routine, but in how they interpret the experience. They stop chasing sleep as if it's something they're failing at, and start noticing what their brain is actually doing at night. Because the moment you understand what's waking your brain up, you start noticing patterns that were always there, patterns that point directly to what's causing the interruption. And those patterns all lead back to one thing, a hidden process that activates during the night, a process that most people have never heard of, but once you see it, you can't unsee it, because it explains why your brain turns on at 3 a.m., why your mind won't shut off once it starts, and why this keeps happening even when everything seems normal. The problem isn't that you can't fall asleep. That's what it looks like on the surface, but it's not the real issue, because most people in this situation actually fall asleep just fine. They get into bed, they drift off, and the night begins normally. There's no struggle at the beginning, no resistance, no delay, which means the system that initiates sleep is still working. So the real question isn't how you fall asleep, but what interrupts it. The real issue is that your brain doesn't allow you to stay asleep. Something changes while you're already resting, not gradually, but in a very specific moment of the night. And when that shift happens, your brain exits deep sleep, not because you moved, not because of noise, but because an internal signal tells it to wake up. And that signal feels invisible, but incredibly precise. When this happens, the brain activates something very specific, not panic, not anxiety, but a controlled state of alertness, a subtle but powerful switch into what we call brain alert mode, where awareness increases even if nothing is happening. Your senses sharpen slightly, your thoughts begin to form, and your mind becomes active before your body can respond, almost like the system is checking something in the background. This is why it feels so different from normal waking. You're not fully awake, but you're not asleep either. You're stuck in a kind of in-between state where your body wants to go back to sleep, but your brain won't let it fully disengage again. And the longer you stay there, the more aware you become, until falling back asleep starts to feel out of reach. And the timing of this matters more than people realize, because it often happens in the same window of the night, right when your body should be at its deepest level of restoration, when melatonin is still active and the system should be stable. But instead of staying in that deep phase, your brain shifts into alert mode at the worst possible time, interrupting the exact stage that restores your energy. So what you're experiencing isn't random wakefulness, it's a transition your brain is actively creating, a switch from deep sleep into controlled alertness. And once that switch is triggered, everything changes. Your thoughts, your awareness, your ability to return to sleep. But what's even more important is this: something specific is causing that switch to happen in the first place. Sleep science now refers to this as the Neural Sleep Inhibition Response, not a disorder in the traditional sense, but a protective pattern, a state where the brain shifts out of deep sleep on purpose, even when your body is still fully capable of resting. It doesn't feel dramatic or intense when it happens, but the effect is immediate and very precise, because the brain is no longer allowing full sleep to continue. In this state, the brain keeps the nervous system partially active, not enough to fully wake you, but enough to block deep restoration. Your alertness rises just beneath the surface of awareness, your sleep cycles become lighter and more fragmented, and your brain begins monitoring instead of recovering, almost like it's waiting for something, even if nothing is there. That's why the transition feels subtle but impossible to ignore. This response is closely tied to early cortisol activation. Cortisol isn't just a stress hormone, it's a timing signal, and when it rises earlier than it should during the night, it sends a message that the system needs to prepare. At the same time, your circadian rhythm loses stability, and the nervous system becomes more sensitive to small shifts, which increases the likelihood of the brain switching states. When these elements combine, the brain enters alert mode, not because something is wrong, but because something feels off, even if you're not consciously aware of it. And once this happens, the sleep process is interrupted. Not completely, but just enough to pull you out of depth, leaving you in that half-awake, half-asleep condition, where rest no longer feels complete or continuous. And this is exactly why your experience feels so specific. You wake up at 3 a.m. without a clear external reason. Your brain won't shut off even though you're not stressed. You experience a racing mind that doesn't feel emotional, and no matter how still you stay, you can't fall asleep again because the system controlling sleep has already shifted and it's no longer prioritizing deep rest in that moment. So what seems like different problems on the surface, waking up, overthinking, light sleep, feeling exhausted, are actually connected to the same underlying mechanism. The Neural Sleep Inhibition Response is the common link, and once this response is activated during the night, it changes how your brain behaves until morning. But the real question is, what makes this response trigger when it does? During the night, your brain follows a very precise internal rhythm, not something you feel consciously, but something that guides everything. Melatonin rises to signal safety and deepen sleep cycles. Cortisol stays low to prevent unnecessary alertness, and your nervous system slows down into a restorative state. This balance is what allows you to stay asleep without interruption, and when it holds, sleep flows naturally from one phase to another. But this system is more sensitive than most people realize. It doesn't take a major disruption to affect it. Even small internal shifts can change how the brain interprets the night. A slight change in timing, a subtle increase in activation, and the brain begins to reassess the situation, not consciously, but through biological signaling. And once that signal changes, the entire system responds. When that rhythm shifts, even slightly, the brain detects instability, not danger in the obvious sense, but something off in the pattern. And instead of continuing into deeper sleep stages, it prepares for awareness, just in case. This is where the transition begins to happen quietly. Before you open your eyes, before you move, your brain has already started changing states. Instead of staying in deep sleep, it switches into alert mode, not fully waking you, but pulling you out of restoration. Your nervous system becomes more active than it should be. Your internal awareness starts to rise in the background, and your brain begins monitoring instead of recovering. That's why the shift feels subtle at first, but grows quickly, because the system is no longer aligned with deep sleep. At the same time, cortisol begins to rise earlier than expected, not to wake you fully, but enough to increase alertness. This early activation sends a signal throughout the body. Your system prepares even though it's still night, and that preparation interrupts the depth of your sleep cycle, leaving you in that unstable, half-awake, half-asleep condition, where rest no longer feels complete or continuous. So when you wake up, it's not by accident. It's the result of a system that already shifted before you noticed. Your brain didn't fail to keep you asleep. It made a decision based on the signals it received, a decision to activate instead of remain in deep rest. And once that happens, everything you experience after, the thoughts, the awareness, the inability to sleep, is just the continuation of that same process. This becomes more noticeable after 40, not because something is failing, but because the system evolves. The body begins to respond differently to the same internal signals. What once felt stable now requires more precise balance, and subtle changes that used to go unnoticed become more visible, especially during the most sensitive window of the night, when the brain depends on stability to stay in deep sleep. As this shift happens, the body becomes more sensitive to cortisol. Even small, early increases start to have a stronger effect.
The circadian rhythm also becomes slightly less rigid, which means timing matters more than it did before. The brain pays closer attention to internal fluctuations, and it reacts faster when something feels out of sync, even if nothing feels different during the day. Sleep itself begins to change in texture. It becomes lighter, more responsive, less insulated, not necessarily shorter, but easier to interrupt. The transitions between sleep stages become more delicate, and the system that once stayed stable through the night now becomes easier to influence from the inside, which increases the chances of activation during sleep.
This is where the neural sleep inhibition response becomes more likely to trigger without warning, because the brain is operating in a more sensitive mode. It doesn't need a strong signal to shift states anymore. A subtle change in rhythm is enough to activate alertness, especially in the middle of the night when timing is critical. And once that activation begins, the pattern repeats itself. That's why so many people say the same thing. I never had this problem before. Because for years, their system handled these shifts quietly. It absorbed small changes without interrupting sleep. But now, those same changes create visible effects, not because something is wrong, but because something adapted, and that adaptation changed how the brain protects itself at night. But here's what makes this even more important to understand. This sensitivity doesn't just increase the chances of waking up, it also changes how the brain behaves after you wake, why your mind turns on faster than it used to, why falling back asleep feels harder than before, and why this pattern tends to repeat around the same time, pointing to something deeper that's still influencing the cycle. Think of your brain like a night security system, not something you control consciously, but something always active. Its job isn't just to help you sleep, it's to protect you. And at night, it decides whether it's safe to fully power down. When everything feels stable, predictable, and aligned, the system reduces activity without resistance, and that's when deep, uninterrupted sleep becomes possible. In that state, everything quiets naturally. Your thoughts slow down without effort, your body sinks deeper into restoration, your breathing becomes steady and automatic. There's no need to monitor, no need to check anything. So the system powers down completely. And you stay asleep without even noticing time passing. But when something feels even slightly off, not dangerous, just inconsistent or unstable, the system doesn't fully shut down. It stays partially active in the background, monitoring, scanning, staying ready just in case. Not enough to wake you immediately, but enough to prevent full disconnection from awareness. That's when your sleep begins to change. It becomes lighter, more fragile, easier to interrupt. And at a certain point in the night, that partial activation crosses a threshold. Your brain shifts into alert mode, your awareness rises before your body can respond, and suddenly you're awake without knowing why. This is why you wake up at 3 a.m. so often, why your mind starts moving the moment you notice it, why your thoughts feel automatic, not intentional, and why your body stays tired while your brain stays active. Because the system is no longer resting, it's monitoring. And once that monitoring begins, it becomes harder to return to deep sleep again. So what you're experiencing isn't failure. It's not your body malfunctioning or losing control. It's your brain trying to keep you in a safe state, even if there's no real threat present. It's choosing awareness over restoration. And that choice happens automatically beneath perception, which raises a deeper question about what signal it's actually responding to. Here's what most people don't realize. This state is not fixed and it's not permanent. It feels repetitive, but it's not locked in place, because what you're experiencing is a response, not a condition. And responses can change when the signals behind them change, even if it's been happening for weeks or months. The pattern only continues while the signals remain the same.
Your brain is not broken. It hasn't lost the ability to keep you asleep. It's reacting to something it interprets as instability, not consciously, but through biological feedback. And once that feedback shifts, the response shifts with it, which means the system can return to a stable state without needing to force anything or override the process. Because the neural sleep inhibition response is not something your brain wants to maintain. It's something it activates when necessary and deactivates when it no longer detects a reason. So when the signals become consistent again, when the timing, rhythm, and internal cues stabilize, the brain stops interrupting your sleep cycles and allows the night to unfold naturally again. That's when sleep starts to feel different. Not deeper all at once, but more continuous. You stay asleep longer without sudden awareness. Your mind doesn't activate in the middle of the night, and even if you briefly wake, you drift back easily because the system is no longer holding you in alert mode. It's finally allowing full restoration to happen. This is how people begin to sleep through the night again, not by trying harder, but by removing the interruption. They stop chasing sleep as something to achieve, and instead they allow the brain to return to balance, which brings back that natural ability to stay asleep and wake up feeling like rest actually happened without that lingering mental fatigue in the morning. But this only begins to happen when you stop forcing sleep from the outside and start stabilizing the system that controls it. Because effort doesn't calm the brain at night, precision does, through the right internal signals that tell your brain it's safe to stay offline. And once those signals are understood and applied, the shift begins in a way most people never expect. The goal isn't sedation. It's not about knocking your brain out or forcing sleep to happen, because when you try to force it, the system resists. Sleep doesn't come from pressure, it comes from stability. What your brain actually needs is a different type of signals that tell it everything is under control, that cortisol timing is regulated, that the night is predictable, that it no longer needs to stay alert. Because when those signals are missing, the brain stays active, scanning, monitoring, interrupting your rest cycles. Even if you fall asleep, you don't stay asleep. That's why more people are moving toward doctor-approved natural sleep support, not to sedate the brain, but to guide it, to support circadian rhythm balance, to calm the nervous system, and reduce the neural sleep inhibition response. So instead of forcing sleep, you're restoring the conditions that allow sleep to happen naturally, consistently, without resistance, the way your brain was designed to do it. If you want to see how this works in a practical way, there's more in the pinned comment. And in the next video, you'll understand why this activation happens so often between 3 and 3:30 a.m. and what that reveals about cortisol timing and your ability to sleep through the night.